This story takes place when I was about 12 to 13, around 2005-2006, when MSN was really big. I met a girl in my grade who hung around my group of friends, but I had only just met her. I'm going to call her Alice. She was a very overweight girl who got picked on a lot and apparently didn't have the best home life, so I tried to be nice to her even though she gave off a few red flags of not being the most stable person. Anyway, here's my story. It was a Friday after school and I was waiting for my bus to go to my dad's house for the weekend. My bus was one of the last to leave and Alice comes up and starts talking to me and asks if I want to hang out with her at her grandparents' house. I told her I was going to my dad's and my dad, myself, and my younger siblings were supposed to go see a movie that night. She is really insistent and I eventually say I have to check with my dad. I call him from the office and he surprisingly says yes and tells me to be at Alice's at, I'll say like 7:30 or something to pick me up for the movie. We walk around town a little bit and then go to her house, and she immediately goes to her laptop and signs into MSN with me sitting next to her. I ask her who some people on the list are because I recognize next to none of the people on it. She tells me she has a lot of friends online, which at the time I thought was super weird. Instantly, a bunch of people start messaging her, and in particular one guy I would just call James. I don't remember his real name. His personal message script says something to the effect of, "I love my sexy babe Alice," and I get even more weirded out. She says this guy is her boyfriend who is like 16 and she hasn't met him, but apparently lives just a few hours away. She tells him she is hanging out with a friend and he says something like, "Oh, turn on your webcam, I want to see if I know her." I am uncomfortable with it, but I didn't know her well enough to protest, so she turns it on. But he doesn't turn on his. He starts really creeping me out by saying things like, "Oh, your friend is hot as you are. Ew," and telling me I look hot and should take off my sweater. He makes weird passes like we should make out and stuff like that, and innuendos about a threesome which I don't really understand at the time. I ask why he doesn't turn on his webcam, and she says it's because he doesn't have one, and I start getting even more suspicious. I tell her that I want to get off the computer and go hang out outside and play with her rabbit. She tells him we have to go, and he starts getting really angry at her and obviously manipulating her into staying on. I think he is an incredible creep, so I go outside alone and pet her rabbit in its little enclosure, and she eventually comes outside. She tells me they got into a fight but made up, and he is coming to finally visit her on Friday and wants us all to hang out, even though I never directly spoke to him and she isn't a good friend. So many red flags going off as a middle schooler. I brush it off and we have an uneventful evening until my dad comes and picks me up. Sunday when I get back to my mom's place, I go on MSN and have a friend request from someone I don't know. I assume it is a friend from school. The email seemed very middle school-esque, so I added it. As soon as I do, a window opens and says something like, "Hey sexy girl." I ask who it is and sure enough it is James. I say I have to go and just block him. Monday at school, Alice is talking to me at lunch and says he really liked me and he's coming Friday for sure and asks if we were still in for all hanging out. I make up some excuse about having to go to my dad's again on the bus and she drops it. I believe it was the following Friday our school went into lockdown. Basically, they lock everyone into their classrooms and we turn off the lights and can't leave until it comes over the PA it is all clear. Everyone assumes it is a drill and we do work quietly at our desks and talk. The lockdown lasts most of the period before it is over. In between the next class, a vice principal grabs me outside of class and tells me to come with him to the office. I follow him and he doesn't talk until we get where the guidance counselor is sitting there with a female officer. I'm like, what's going on? They just say they have a few things to ask me, but I can call my parents if I want to. I have no idea what it is all about, and I tell them no. The vice principal asks if I know Alice, and I say yes. He asks if I know a guy named James, and I say no, but Alice does. He tells me the guy wasn't really 16 years old, but a 40-something-year-old guy whose name was Tom. I was freaked out, but I told them I just knew he was supposed to meet her after school, and that was all, and they let me go. The cop just kind of sat there and took notes. I didn't know much about it for a while, but I pieced it together eventually, though, what Alice had said about and other kids who were at the front of the school when he showed up. Apparently, the guy showed up saying he was her uncle and it was an emergency. The receptionist in the office was suspicious to ask for proof as he wasn't on the list of emergency contacts, I think, and of course he didn't have any. She called the principal out and the guy was irate, demanding he send her down. He got even more angry and said that I knew who he was and that I could vouch for him, something to that effect. They refuse and ask him to leave. He won't, so they call the cops and lock down the school, and he just goes nuts in the office apparently. I'm really scared to think about what could have happened to that girl. He knew what school she went to, and my best guess is that he got impatient to do whatever to her. I don't think he was charged because he was clearly mentally unstable. Shortly after, I cut ties with Alice because she was into a lot of risky behaviors, even after that. I was 12 years old, circa 2002, and I was walking home from school around 3 p.m. It was sunny and bright, and I had no reason to think that my walk home was going to be any different than it had ever been. I lived about 1 mile away from my middle school. The way home was very safe. I knew about 10 people who lived along the way, and there were many mom and pop shops that peppered the path home. It was also broad daylight on a somewhat crowded street for a beach town suburb. I had just passed an insurance office and convenience store when I noticed a homeless man on the corner. This wasn't rare for my part of town, where many aging hippies and burnouts live by the shore and ask for handouts during the day. 90% of these men are harmless. They don't even yell. They just ask for change and shrug if you say no. Being naive and used to my safe walk home, I paid no attention to the man other than to utter a soft, casual hello as I walked by. He didn't seem to hear me. As I am walking by and up the hill behind him, I hear footsteps behind me and guttural ramblings. It sounded like he was trying to get my attention, but I knew enough not to engage him. I had no money and he seemed drunk. I quickened my pace. My heart rate went up from fear, and I had hoped that my speed would deter him. I was already at least 50 feet in front of him uphill, but he only kept going faster. Finally, I was at a jog and he was catching up. I had a heavy backpack and sandals, so I couldn't run. He grabbed my arm and spun me around. I could smell weed and alcohol on his breath. He pushed me into the bushes by an apartment complex, and right before he was going to lean in, a car screeched by on the curb and yelled, "Get off!" He got up confused, and I took the moment of respite to get out of the bushes and run to the curb. The woman behind the wheel opened her passenger's door and asked me to get in. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. Just get away from that creep." I got in. She sped off and told me to call the police as soon as I got home. My mom wouldn't be home until 7 p.m., so all I could do was tell my neighbor, whom we were supposed to go to if anything happened, and call. The dispatcher took down all my information pretty easily. I was so shocked and full of adrenaline I hadn't cried or broken down yet, and almost felt like I was watching everything happen. About an hour later, I got a call back from the police telling me that they had found the guy who had attacked me and asked if they could come by my house to get my statement. I said I'd have to wait until my mom came from picking up my sister, but really from her job 1 hour away. They said I could wait until the next day. The man they caught was a notorious drunk around the area. He had been mostly harmless, but recently had gotten into harder drugs like crystal meth, which had caused him to get more violent and commit petty thefts around the neighborhood. This was the first time he had tried anything dangerous. This encounter happened to my mom when she was in middle school in the early 70s. Her family lived outside of town, so she rode the bus to and from school. She was in 6th grade and had a boyfriend who also rode her bus. They would sit together and hold hands, but they were not inappropriate with their interactions. The bus driver took notice of their relationship and started to make comments to them. He'd asked if they kissed a lot, if they tongued, and even once asked if he sniffed her underwear. Not knowing what to do, they did their best to ignore him. On the last day of school, the bus route went as usual, except the driver skipped my mom's stop. When he stopped at the next house, several miles away, she tried to get off the bus with that girl. The kids all knew each other pretty well and were friends. The driver stopped her and made her go sit back down. Every stop after that, she tried to get off of the bus, and he'd tell her to go sit back down until she was the last one left on the bus. She was already terrified and crying. She said that she didn't remember if she was praying out loud or not, but she remembers just begging for an idea of how to get away. The driver told her to move to the front of the bus right beside his seat. Instead, she picked up her things, moved to the very last seat. On her way, she set her books and things in the middle of the aisle, hoping that if he did come after her, he would be slowed down. He finally started back down her road towards her house, but turned off onto a dirt road leading back to some brush. She finally decided that if he even slowed down enough, she was going out the back emergency door and making a run for it. As he turned onto another dirt road deeper into the brush, she happened to glance out the back window to see her dad and her older brother, he was an adult, in their truck following behind. She shouted up to the driver, "You better stop this bus right now. That's my dad behind the bus." He stopped the bus and opened the doors for her to get off, but she was too scared to move. Within a few seconds, her dad was on the bus, standing right up next to the driver so that she could walk around behind him. He told her to get into the truck with her brother. As she sat in the truck, she could see her dad through the back window of the bus, just going off on this guy, verbally, unfortunately. When her dad got back into the truck, he hugged her like never before, and she just lost it crying. She knew that if her dad was scared, she'd just escaped with her life. Now, this wasn't just a coincidence that her dad had found her. Every kid who got off the bus after they missed my mom's stop had gone home and told their parents that the driver wouldn't let her off the bus and that she was really scared and crying. The parents all called my grandparents to let them know the stories that they were getting. My grandparents never reported the incidents to the police or the school, but they did talk to the owner of the bus company, and they never saw that bus guy driving again. My mom believes that they didn't report it to the police because her dad had threatened the driver's life, and he would in turn report that to the police. My grandfather went onto his grave without ever revealing what he said to that bus driver. Several years later, my mother was talking with her mother-in-law, we'll call her Grandma C, about Grandma C's cousin, who was married to a guy from my mom's hometown. Grandma C was telling her that this guy was in prison for impregnating his 14-year-old stepdaughter. As an off-the-cuff remark, she mentioned that he used to drive a school bus in the district where my mom went to school. My mom almost passed out at this news. She asked his name and was given the name of the bus driver who abducted her all those years ago. I had the displeasure of meeting this individual while attending the same middle school as him and sharing a few classes, one of them being home economics. I really liked that class except for the part where this kid would throw sewing needles at me. Not funny and not safe. I could have lost an eyeball because of this stupid idiot. I admit, I wasn't the best-looking kid or the most popular, but I did blossom later on in high school. And just because I was an awkward fatty with glasses didn't give him the right to bully me anyways. Moving on now to high school, like I said, I blossomed and had developed some type of self-esteem by that time. I was getting male attention that I didn't get before, and one day this guy shows up in my inbox on Facebook to tell me how attractive he thought that I was and wondering if we could get together. Of course I declined, not only because he had been a jerk to me a few years earlier, but because he came off as a creep who would not take a solid no for an answer. Every day he would message me and get ignored or a sarcastic response depending on how I was feeling at the time. He was quite annoying with his persistence. I had moved to a different city and went to a different high school, so I luckily didn't see him ever. I moved due to my mom remarrying, not because of him. Then one day my sister mentions an attack on a girl she was classmates with. The girl had been attacked by her friends and a few familiar names that my sister and I knew from having lived in that area, and apparently they, quote-unquote, had their way with her. I've gone to school with them, and the name that stood out the most was his, as he had been trying to get with me to meet up with him for a few months, and thankfully, I had been smart enough to let him know he was barking up the wrong tree. I went to middle school at a private school where the middle and high school was comprised of only 30 students. One of the assistant coaches for my middle school team was a soft-spoken man that volunteered for many of our school functions. I assume this is due to the fact that he had 2 adopted sons that attended my school. One was a grade older and one was a couple of grades below me. I didn't really remember him at all until I graduated high school and out of the blue get a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Still don't know how he got my number. It turns out to be that this man was wishing me a happy graduation. I at first thought that he was just friendly, but then he called back insisting on taking me for a steak dinner. I tried to politely decline, but he began texting me and calling me nonstop. This made me really uncomfortable, and so I sternly requested he leave me be. A couple of years later, I am a sophomore in college and I received this email. Dear me, I shall try one last time, though not to bother, but to seek a friendship that I can feel can work and benefit us both. It seems that most people pass through their lives and leave a vacant mark, soon to be forgotten, or, if thought of, just a passing blip that does not linger. However then, there are those who leave their mark as if to say, I am somebody of value, I want to make a difference. I'm not sure where or how I so tragically messed up in trying to recapture a friendship that I felt important, not wanting anything more or anything less, but a friendship of value and a meaning that would be of importance to two lives. Long ago, as a soccer coach, there was a young man of intrigue on my team. His intelligence shone through his skills on the soccer field, and there was something there, something that sparked a thought of value. It was difficult to define, harder still to understand. Nonetheless, that young man left a mark that would stay in the portals of my mind. Typically, society does not take kindly to a grown married man taking up a friendship with a young man with a family of his own. Innocent, of course, respectfully even more, but still looked at with this inevitable stink eye. Maybe one day the paths of this coach and team member will cross again. Most of the friendships that I value in my life have come along in the most unusual way. For instance, the 19-year-old female classmate at mortuary school that just seemed to fit under my wing. I was the one that was not interested in hitting on her, just establishing a friendship that could last for years to come. Or perhaps the 93-year-old lady in the nursing home who was hungry for the company of someone that enjoyed listening to her stories of times gone by. The 70-year-old author from Casey County that immediately gave a feeling of commonality that was uncovered after just a few dinners and glasses of Merlot. A young friend of a son who, lacking a father figure, just wanted respect from a generation that was not willing to give it. I could go on and on. I have found that the old saying that you can't pick your family, however, you can pick your friends is of tremendous value in my life. Souls are waiting around every corner or in the most bizarre places, but when you encounter them, the rewards are endless. What does all this mean? For you, perhaps nothing, or maybe, just maybe, something. This is for you to decide. Nature may have already taken its course, but I try not to give up on anything that I consider of value in my life or the lives of others. Best regards, him. I responded extremely curtly and notified this man that I forward the email to my father, attorney at law. I don't like to speculate, but considering the nature of the adoption of the demeanor and behavior of his sons growing up, as well as their age of proximity to me, I really worry about their upbringing. I never heard from this man since, but my younger sister said one of her male friends has had similar interactions with him. To add to the creepiness, this man is a mortician in my county. I would like to add a bit more context to this story. I would receive multiple voicemails a day of this man telling me things like, I want to take you out to a big steak dinner. Anything you want. We can even share some wine at my house before, or I don't know what I'm doing wrong and why you were pushing me away. I think we can truly get along great. Now, I agree. At first I thought this man was simply reaching out to me in a friendly manner, but the persistence after being nicely turned down is what raised red flags. After starting college, I received a new phone number as well as a new email address. Not for this reason, but because I got my own phone plan and started university with a new email. My second year here, he tracked down both informations again. This is when he sent this letter as well as started the calls again. It was only after telling the man that I forwarded his email to my father, who happened to be an attorney, that he left me alone. A few months later, the county prosecutor contacted me requesting information. When I recalled this story, I did a quick Google search of his email and name and found at least 2 obituaries of 14 and 15-year-old boys that live in different states from him, where he posts on the online funeral page expressing condolences. I won't add his exact wording or the sites because I don't want to reveal his identity, but both were identical and went something like this. Parents, may God give you strength. I feel like I have gotten to know your son through the Facebook posts and messages we have shared, and have grown to love him and have plenty of respect for him. My heart is aching. I love you. Insert son's name. It is speculative, but it sounds as if he doesn't personally know these boys, and the similar wording he uses to the letter he sent me further raises red flags. And lastly, I want to reiterate that I barely knew this man. We never had an opportunity to be alone and develop some bond that he refers to. He was the assistant coach for my middle school soccer team. I rarely even made it on the field as I was in the 6th grade and it was a middle school team. It was not as if he was some teacher I saw every day, and I sincerely left an impression on him. I didn't even remember he existed until the calls and emails started. In middle school, we had a campus security guard named Mr. Cole. He was a pudgy white guy somewhere in his 30s, not much hair. From what I remember, he was pretty social with most of the kids. Just really friendly, joked around with us, etc. I was one of the kids who would talk to him often because he was just a really cool guy. He always seemed a little off, but since I was a social reject with not many friends, I figured I probably seemed off too. I would lightly one-arm hug any of the teachers or staff I felt comfortable with. I assume now because they were the only ones who made me feel accepted. This most likely made me a bit naive. He would usually try to bear hug me. Looking back on this, it was creepy at the time. It was whatever, but I would do my awkward half one-arm hug and scurry away. Fast forward, I'm a sophomore in high school now, and someone I've kept in contact with once in a blue moon since elementary school emails me a news article. Mr. Cole had changed careers since I'd left middle school. He had become the junior varsity girls basketball team coach at some school about 20 or 30 minutes away. Unfortunately, the article wasn't about him changing jobs. He was being arrested because he was having sexual relations with a few of his 14 to 15-year-old students on the team. Only one of them had given consent. Though being a minor, it was still considered illegal. This creeps me out terribly because he was our security guard. At middle school age, this is someone who you trust to keep you safe. When I read the article, I felt sick and horrified that I had conversations with him. I'd even hugged this man. This takes place in middle school when I just moved to Houston. I was new, hadn't made any new friends yet, and I was horrifically shy. In my 3rd week or so in this new and alien environment, I went to the lunch line as usual, and the lines run in an upside-down U-shape with a rail in the center to prevent people from cutting in line. As I'm entering the line, I can't help but feel someone burning X-rays into my back, so I turn around and I see this guy about 2 to 3 people behind me looking at me with this hungry look. Idiot me didn't make anything of it and just proceeded along the line. When I finally reach the counter to grab a tray at the middle of the U, I suddenly feel something grab my butt, rather hard. Feeling rather angry and violated, I turned around about to scream at whoever just groped me. I managed to get the words out. What is your freaking problem? When I did the full 180 and saw it was the same guy who was leering at me earlier. Big surprise. Only this time he was trying to reach for my crotch and sporting an expression on his face I can only describe as somewhere between excited and horrifying. He was shaking his head with his mouth open. At this point, I really don't want to be stuck in the same line with this guy, obviously, who just grabbed my butt and wants God knows what else, so I drop my tray, push and shove through a bunch of cursing kids, and go to the library where I hide among the shelves. When I was in middle school, my friend Jake essentially lived at my mother's house due to varying circumstances. We typically crashed on these rickety old couches in my unfinished basement, which, besides the insulation and concrete, was adorned only with movie and music posters. We had 2 window wells down there which allowed sunlight in during the day, as well as a bit of atmospheric moonlight when we went to sleep. One weekend, my mom had allowed us to watch the house by ourselves, which was crazy and exciting for both of us, yet ultimately only resulted in a bunch of empty soda bottles, pixie sticks, and a cumulative 40 hours of gaming between the 2 of us. However, that Saturday night contained something a little less fun than a marathon session of Crackdown. We probably crashed at around 2 or 3 in the morning. Now, the couch that I typically slept on faced a section of concrete wall that sat right next to the window. If I laid with my head closest to the wall, I would be able to see the sky and the top of a tree that sat in our backyard. If I laid the other way, I could see the tree trunk, the fence, a bit of grass, and a little sliver of sky. Unfortunately for me, I chose the latter on that night. Like I said, it was the wee hours of the morning when I awoke from a dream or otherwise, and within those first few hazy seconds of consciousness, I heard a creak from above me. Our floors were creaky, annoyingly so when they sit above teenagers who want nothing more to do than sleep in until 4 in the afternoon. It was so bad that you could hear the individual clicks of the nails in the feet of our miniature schnauzers, Simon and Winston, with clarity rivaling a pair of skull candy earbuds. So I woke up and immediately froze when I heard one long creak from the floor above me. I rapidly thought through everything that I did before bed. Lock the doors, check. Close the blinds, check. Put Simon and Winston away, check, check. I lay still for a solid minute before I gathered enough bravery to crane my neck and see if Jake still lay on the perpendicular couch. He was still there. At first this was reassuring, as I now knew that he was safe, but the second wave of realization, stupidly enough, took another second. I realized what that meant the very second that I heard 3 creaks in rapid succession. They were moving towards the kitchen, which meant that they were moving closer to the basement door. I'd like to say that I grabbed a bat and stormed upstairs, confronted the criminal and or otherworldly being, and threatened them with the great charisma before shooing them out of my house. I'd like to say that the lights came on, my family came out of the bedrooms alongside my best friends, and they all lifted me into the air, popped champagne, and gave me a trophy that read, "Big Hero" on it. I'd love to say that, but I can't. I stayed right in that bed with what felt like a giant invisible rock sitting on my chest. I was attempting to call out to Jake, but I could do little more than stutter some incoherent words of fear. I kept my eyes open through much of this, hoping to retain some semblance of alertness in the scenario. It was only when I heard a quick succession of creaks that neared my basement door that I slammed them shut. I don't know how long I laid there, eyes glued shut, hands gripping desperately at the sleeping bag, but I do remember a few things. I heard my dogs growling at some point. They weren't barking like they typically do when anyone approaches any possible entrance to the house, which helps me cling to the hope that it was all my imagination. But I do remember hearing deep grumbling noises coming from the area of the ceiling that held up their cages on the main floor. I remember several more creaks, though I cannot say with any sort of accuracy where they were in relation to the floor above me. I think I was disoriented, too scared. Up until this point, it really doesn't seem like a memory that I should have retained so vividly. Up until this point. I lay there, eyes shut for who knows how long, but was, of course, unable to fall back asleep. When I did open my eyes, a safe time after hearing any more creaking, they fixated directly on the small view of my backyard that I had through the window. That moonlight was my saving grace. So I calmed down, relaxed. House is settled, I told myself. Dogs growl. I did voluntarily attempt to fall back to sleep, but at a certain point, waning fears outweighed by the after effects of a sugar high. My eyes began to flutter. But before I could entirely drift off, I noticed a rapid change in the freeze frame of my yard that my eyes had grown so accustomed to over the last several minutes. Over the next few seconds, I saw a shadow crawl in the grass through the window. Now, I'm a skeptic, so I must say here that I am sure that it was a person. That, however, is no less terrifying. Human beings have the potential to be the worst kinds of monsters. As I watched, adrenaline flowing through my veins and teeth grinding down to the gum, I swear that he or she looked over at me in my fortress of slumber and grinned. If I were a sort of artist, I could draw it, seeing as that image is seared into my mind. It stopped only briefly before continuing on its way and, at some point, exiting my frame of sight. I stayed still, alert, and awake until the sun rose. When it did, I woke Jake up. He wasn't happy about this, and told him we were going to make pancakes. He wouldn't have stayed another night in my home if I had mentioned anything regarding the last several hours. We went upstairs. I quietly inspected the house. To the best of my knowledge, nothing was taken. The doors were locked and the only windows open were on the second floor. They had screens on them, but from personal experience, I can tell you that they can be removed and replaced with ease. We had pancakes. They were terrible. It all seems kind of silly now, but everything in hindsight tends to. At the very best, it was the result of an overactive imagination fueled by gallons of high fructose corn syrup and piles of pixie sticks. But at the worst, there was someone in my house, someone who managed to make sure that my noisy dogs didn't bark at them, someone very, very quiet, and someone with the nerve to smile at a child who saw them through the window of the house that they had just broken into. Hey friends, if you enjoy the narrations and wish to support my channel further, feel free to head over to Patreon, where for $1 or more a month, you'll have early access to all future content and many other awesome rewards. Thanks again, and I'll see you again soon.